Hey there, everybody. It's Mike out with another video from Savage Kingdom's role-playing game and Fire in the Head Productions and Dungeons& and Dragons 5th Edition, because this video is about the possibility of converting Savage Kingdoms 3 to D&D 5. And when I say convert, I don't mean like completely that's I'm going to convert the entire system to D&D and not worry about Savage Kingdoms as my own system, but rather to expand it into D&D as well as keeping the true SK rules, as we kind of call it around here, true SK. So I'm speaking about this. This is my offering. This is Savage Kingdoms role-playing game. Its own system. It is based on a D20. In fact, that's all it uses is D20s, for those of you who don't know. But it is not a D20 system, as it were, trademarked as such. Hold on, as I dip out of frame. Anyway, so these are the two systems we're talking about. I think everybody knows about Dungeons and Dragons, particularly 5th edition. And anyway, so yeah, converting these two where they play off of each other. So they already kind of do, like when I do run D&D, I don't run it that much, but I run it for summer camps and for after school clubs occasionally for mostly for kids. I seldom run it for adults. My adult players tend to like my system, which I admire them for, Savage Kingdoms. But I do run D&D 5 for after school stuff, summer camps, as I just said. So I tend to not like, I'm not a big Forgotten Realms person. I'm not a big, sounds kind of snobbish. I'm not a big, I don't like the campaign settings of Dungeons and Dragons that much. They're okay. I mean, they're kind of iconic and that's kind of cool, but I think a lot of people kind of agree with me, possibly secretly, that Forgotten Realms is great and all. It's very detailed, but it's a little vanilla, perhaps. Um, Not that my setting is probably much less vanilla, but maybe it is. I don't know. We'll see. I actually kind of like Greyhawk, which is Gary Gygax's one, but you don't really see that played as much. And I like Dark Sun a lot. Dark Sun because it's more gritty sword and sorcery, which appeals to me. Not a big high fantasy fan. So in that case, you might ask, Mike, if you're not a big high fantasy fan, why ever are you talking about Dungeons and Dragons, the ultimate high fantasy tabletop role playing game? Well, because I still like D&D overall. I go back to 1979 with Dungeons and Dragons, first edition, the original edition. Um, the little white, just beyond the little white books. I had the little white books, but I really started playing, I guess, with the set, the Holmes basic set. I actually realized I started with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Honestly, there was some kid at the high school running it after school, or was it? It might have even been during school. We had this cool teacher that actually let us. If we were caught up on our work, we'd actually get to play for an hour or so. So that was kind of cool. And if I recall, that was AD&D because the Player's Handbook had just come out, and then the Monster Manual shortly thereafter, and then the Dungeon Master's Guide. I think is how it went. Um, yeah. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling just to say that I go back a ways with Dungeons and Dragons, so it's still kind of in my core. And there's a lot of people like me who like kind of love it and hate it at the same time because we love it because that's how we started the hobby, right? And it's very nostalgic for some of us old timers. But at the same time, there are a lot of other games that probably aesthetically were designed better, only because they had really nothing anywhere to go but up after Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you take because that like that was a whole different thing. And then as a game designer, you can just pretty easily build off of that. Not that there weren't some games that went down, because there probably were. In fact, I've played a couple of those. Um, but for the most 95% of the time, you can just build. You're just going to go upward from Dungeons and Dragons, right? So that's why a lot of people will say that there are probably technically better designed game systems out there than Dungeons and Dragons. But D&D has a very nostalgic feel to it. And if I might say something about 5th edition, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, is that it's kind of an improvement. I mean, there's still some old clunky stuff that's D&D, but that also kind of makes D&D what it is. But I feel like 5th edition really improved on a lot of stuff. There's still some weird isms, obviously, and there's maybe even one or two design choices that to me went actually down. But 90% of the choices I thought went kind of elevated. Dungeons and Dragons and kind of got rid of some of the tripe before, and some people might complain, and I kind of agree that it's a little maybe oversimplified, but it does make it a good entry-level game for new, particularly younger gamers, or even newer, older gamers. Um, it's fairly easy. It's again, it's a little clunky, and some of the verbiage in fifth edition is kind of weird. Like the language is almost too simplified at times, and it almost makes less sense than if you were just written it in a sort of higher English format. But anyway, that's a whole different diatribe. But in general, it's pretty easy to kind of get into, mainly because there are so many people that play it. And Dungeons and Dragons is one of those games. It's almost on a master and apprentice relationship. Like it's far easier to learn from someone, a dungeon master, or just a player who's played a long time about the game than it is to literally learn it from the book. It's really tough unless you're super smart and like really and used to game design. You could probably figure out most of it without anyone helping you, but for the most part, it is a game that you have to learn as a master and apprentice relationship almost. That sort of thing. So yeah, it's a long ramble of saying that it's kind of easy to get into, but also not. But it's easy because there are a lot of people who play it. So yeah, so I'm going to get to a few points finally about why I might be converting my Savage Kingdoms um, setting to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. First of all, it already is kind of technically converted. Um, what I was going to say after that whole spiel was I tend to run my own setting instead of Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, whatever. Mystara, Eberron. Um, so I I tend to run. I don't have a name for the world. It's just Savage Kingdoms, or the known world, because it's very mystic. It's very ancient age, dark ages. Uh, very few people, if anyone's aware of the concept of a planet. So there's not really a name for the planet. There kind of is in some, like Alfheim is one of the northern people that kind of means the entire existence. Um, so there's kind of a name maybe for the planet or for the world, but not really. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. It's a fantasy setting. It's not a science fiction setting. So we shouldn't be fixated upon planets and such. So anyway, I use that setting already for D&D because it's all the lore is just, I mean, it's all part of my DNA at this point. It's a pretty old setting. When I published Savage Kingdoms 6 years ago, the first edition, that kind of set a lot of it down on paper and, got it published and got some stuff out of my head. But that's only 10% of it. There's 90% of it that's still unpublished. It's still floating around in here. It's just so much easier to run a game out of my setting that I created and have dabbled with for 30 plus years, 35 years, and then run another one that I'm only vaguely familiar with. So there's that. So, um, so why would I convert SK to 5th edition? All right. So number one, greater appeal popularity, which I just kind of went ahead and almost already said. Dungeons and Dragons, as we know, has a greater, wider appeal than any tabletop role-playing game. There's some big ones out there, Pathfinder, Savage Worlds, etc. But Dungeons and Dragons is still massively larger, and all of those, well, Pathfinder in particular, are just derivatives of D&D. And really, all of them. I mean, Savage Kingdoms technically is too. Really, all of them are. If you really trace the lineage back to the progenitor, which would be in D&D. So greater appeal, popularity. Yeah, so if you convert your setting to an existing setting, especially when the tools are out there to do it on places such as Dungeon Masters Guild from Drive Through RPG, that make it really, really nice. And Wizards of the Coast have done, I think, a pretty good job of like allowing people, authors and writers and designers to design their own things using the D&D SRD, and then you split the profits for it. Actually, I think the writer actually technically gets a little bit more than Wizard of the Coast. It may be 50-50, I'm not sure, 60-40, but in any case, to me it seems pretty fair. So number two, more exposure for the setting. So this is slightly vain, but I think every author, designer should have a little bit of vanity, right? Because you're putting your stuff out there. So more exposure for the setting. In other words, I really like my setting. It's been around for a while. There's some things I'm not crazy about, but overall, I really like my setting. And so if I put it out there as D&D 5th edition as well as Savage Kingdoms, then you got then it's just more exposure to more players. So the players that don't really know about my setting right now are just people that play Savage Kingdoms, and there's as much as I'm proud of the game and love it and love all the people that have supported it. There's let's be honest, there's only probably a couple of hundred people on the planet that are even playing it, if that. Um, whereas D&D would be 10,000 times more people playing, or 50,000 times more, whatever the math is on that. So it's just greater exposure. So you have this setting that you really like, and you're like, man, I kind of wish more people would know about it, because you get a fair amount of compliments on it, and it's like, so just it almost makes sense to put it both out there. The kind of drawback is, which is what I've been wrestling with over the last few years, is and I've had somebody say this, and I kind of get it, but they're like, you don't want to cheapen your setting, right? You don't want to lessen or water down your setting with D&D, which is awesome, but it could also be a little kitchen sinky and a little vanilla-y ish esque. Um, so I kind of get that, but I also kind of feel like that's a little insulting. I'm like, it's not really watering it, because it's in some ways it's adding to it, because it's so much bigger than the game system I came up for the setting of Savage Kingdoms. So anyway, so more exposure for the setting, regardless of the goods and evils. So number 3, double the chance of playing. So it's kind of what I almost just said, but this is what I wrote down for number 3, so I'm saying it. So double the chance of playing 2 systems. In other words, if 2 systems are in existence, and that's just exponentially a greater chance that more people will be playing your game. Whether it's so maybe they're not playing the game system you designed, the Savage Kingdoms game system, because it's its own thing, but at least they're playing in your setting. And also, there are ways to kind of sneak in, which I've kind of done, to sneak in. And 5th edition is a good way to do that, because it's a very nice little simple building block system, and you can add a lot of modular things onto it. I've heard a lot of other people describe that too. It's very modular, which is a good thing for the most part. So you can add stuff to it while still keeping the core system intact. So some of my design things that I came up with Savage Kingdoms, I can kind of sneak in there to 5th edition and kind of 5e-ize it a little bit. Um, New feats and spells, and so a couple other subsystems, a way of doing things, things like that, to make it Savage Kingdoms, but without going overboard, because you don't want to make it also not too D&D, right? So you can, if you swing one way or the other, then you might lose half of your audience, so to speak. So you have to be a little careful there. It's a little game designer tip there. Number 4, potential earnings are greater. So yeah, this is very financial. Um, so yeah, so if you write for DM's Guild or any other ways you can legally publish your stuff through using D&D and Wizards of the Coast um, stuff, or if you buy a license through them, you're just going to earn more money. So me trying to, this isn't my main job. An actor is my main job, but I've been hurting in that as well during this COVID time. So I've been relying more on game design and game running professionally as a professional dungeon master or game master. That's actually probably earning, actually it is, it's earning me more money than as an actor right now, honestly. So I'm having to kind of speak from a bread and butter and shelter standpoint here. So doing the D&D version probably will make me more money than just focusing on Savage Kingdoms that very few people know about. Case in point, the hardcover book has been on for sale now for 4 days to the public, and only 2 copies have sold. Yeah, so that's 1 copy per 48 hours. Not great. I mean, on one hand, I'm happy it's cool. I'm glad a couple of people have seen it. And the Indiegogo people, if all the books have gone out to them, that's great. So in a sense, they've paid for that because they contributed. But as far as open general public sales, it's only a couple of people have bought it so far. So I'm just being realistic. So if you just look down the line, you're like, and in these COVID pandemic times, we're just, we're, not, I wouldn't say we're hurting, but we're, it's getting a little tight. So any way to make extra money, right? That's I think everybody needs to be considering that probably these days. So right, number 5, things to offer the D&D community. Things to offer the Dungeons and Dragons community. Meaning that I feel like there. And first of all, let me preface this by saying there's some great stuff. I've looked at DM's Guild. There's less great stuff, but mostly there's really good stuff out there. Some people have come up with some really cool creative stuff, like professional quality stuff. It's really awesome. New subclasses and feats and spells and races and whatever. All that stuff is out there. However, I still, and obviously I haven't read, there's no time would have to read all of that. There's literally impossible. Um, but for what I've read, it's a decent amount. There's still some things I'm like, oh my god, I totally, that niche needs, nobody's doing the niche. I've totally got it with Savage Kingdoms. So I feel like I can be sharing some classes that I have for my setting, some of the new feats, some of the new spells, some of the new races. Um, Now some of my races are kind of redundant. Like there's like a cat folk. There's already a bunch of those. The Chinari. There's like a serpent folk. That's they're kind of like the UNT. So yeah, so nothing probably particularly groundbreaking there, but I do feel like I do have some feats and spells that are filling some cool niches, um, and also kind of giving you some vibrancy to the setting because as a game designer, you have to marry all your game mechanics to your setting. It has to resonate, or else it makes it doesn't make any sense, and B, it won't resonate with your players. They'll be like, I thought the setting was like this, and then now you have this weird thing that makes no sense. So yeah, another game designer note, and probably common sense. So yeah, I just feel like there's some things at the D&D community. So if I convert SK to D&D 5th edition already. So speaking of which, I'm already into, I think I have 50 pages of a document, or maybe even 56, 55, 56 pages already done of the D&D 5th edition version of Savage Kingdoms. So that's already being done. It's kind of going slow because I keep battling in my head like, oh, are you selling out to Dungeon Dragons? No, don't do this. Keep your own setting. I'm like, yes, but it's not selling very well. So there's all this big golem effect going on, an angel demon thing on the shoulder and stuff. Um, and some of it's outside influence. There's a couple people who are like, "Oh, I wouldn't do that. I would stay with your," and whatever. And that's great. And others are like, "Yes, go. You're amazing. Do it." So you just gotta listen to yourself, and think about all the things that I just listed. The big five things. Is that weighing your pros and cons? Are those five things categories I listed, or those add up to a greater pro than a con? What are the cons, by the way? Let's do that really quick before I sign off on this video. So the cons of doing converting your system, in this case, Savage Kingdoms, to D&D, would be more work. You have to do more work. I don't consider that too much of a con because I like to write for the most part and design stuff, even more so. Um, yeah, so that's kind of a con because yeah, you're doing more work for really the same setting, but you are designing it for another rule system, which has broader appeal, which we already went through. So there's a little bit of a con there, but it's also a pro at the same time. So I don't consider that a full con. But yes, there will be extra work because you have to do work to earn money and to make craft cool things for people, right? You have to do the work. All right. Another con would be, I already kind of touched on this. Somebody might be, it could be confusing that you have a D&D Savage Kingdoms and just true Savage Kingdoms. Again, very minor con, but a little bit of a drawback because it might be confusing. Somebody bought the Savage Kingdoms. Where did I put it? Say someone bought my Savage Kingdoms third edition core rule book, or even one of the early editions, and they're like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And then they see the D&D version come out, and then maybe there's a little bit of confusion. Probably shouldn't be too much because the D&D logo will be at the top. You're allowed to use it. And Savage Kingdoms logo is on the Savage Kingdoms. I'll probably put the Savage Kingdoms logo on the D&D too. It'll just be smaller if that's legal. I'm not sure we can do that with DM's Guild. I'll look into it. So anyway, possibility of some very minor confusion, but again, probably a very minor con. What would be another con? Work identification. I just did those. Um, I would say the third possible con I kind of touched upon already is sort of watering down your system. Um, but I don't really think that's watering down. I mean, that's kind of, I don't know, that's kind of cheap. It's not fair. Um, maybe you're enriching your system by using another game system, or your setting by using another game system. Maybe you're actually enriching it because now you have two different game mechanical approaches to your setting and your philosophies. So there, not really a con at all, is it? So, all right. I think it's it for the cons. So as you can see, there's not, to me, in my opinion, it's not really a whole lot of cons. So the last thing I'd like to mention in this video is, first of all, I did a Dungeons and Dragons, the most popular video I've done by far, which is kind of another hint that maybe I should do some more D&D content. It's like 427 views or something, which to me is like a huge amount, because I don't get a lot of likes and follows on the vids. Hopefully that'll increase. Hint, hint. Like and subscribe, share, all that stuff. But going back to that, one that has the bigger view was my D&D house rules. So it's the house rules that I use for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So in Savage Kingdoms 3, I will be using pretty much all of those because I did that video like 2 or 3 years ago. So my stance on those changes really haven't changed at all. If anything, they've been more substantiated. And because the changes are for two reasons, those changes that I did are for two reasons. One, going back to what I said earlier in the video, there's some clunky D&D-isms that are still just weird in there. It's like, why? When you can easily make a rule that's, to me, better or at least easier. So there's a few changes because of that. Two, and the main one to me is because you need to make the rules fit your setting. So, for example, Savage Kingdoms is a little bit grittier, a little bit lower magic. So, and some people aren't going to like this, but that's how it is. You can only use 3 cantrips. For every 3 cantrips you use within an hour, you spend a spell point. So you can't just willy-nilly cantrip, burn, freeze, whatever. Because it goes against the Savage Kingdoms thing where magic's a little rare. It's a little more taken a little more seriously. People don't just go like whipping stuff off because no, I can do it. It's like it's kind of a bigger deal. And I'm going to try to design some other ways to kind of grit the magic a little bit more of sorcery because it is a little bit of a sword and sorcery-ish setting. So we need to show that, right? We need to reflect that. And I just mentioned the word spell points, so that's another thing. I do not like, I've never liked spell memorization. This goes back decades. Spell slots are an improvement, I think, overall, but you're still doing the fire and forget. It's just weird. So I have a very simple system. Everything's converted to spell points. Very simple. You run out of spell points, you get you earn a level of exhaustion. And you can even take advantage of that. So you can actually say you have 1 spell point left and you want to cast and you know how to cast a 2nd level spell and want to cast a 2nd level spell. So it's very simple. Each spell costs a number of spell points equal to the spell level. So in this case, you would need 2 spell points. But however, you only have 1 remaining. You can still do it. It would take you to -1 stamina. -1 stamina or spell points. I'm using stamina's Savage Kingdom's term. Means 1 level of exhaustion. Say if you had 1 spell point and you knew how to cast 3rd level spells, you wanted to cast a 3rd level spell. You could do so, but it would take you to, you got it, -2, 2 levels of exhaustion. So it's kind of a cool little way so you can, you're kind of limited with the spell points a little bit, but then you can go greater if you want, but it's going to tire you. And I think that's also describes a little bit better, like, why are your spell slots or points limited? Why can you just do 3 and then that's all? There's no attachment to what's going on, right? So most DMs, including myself, would describe that, well, I would describe you're just too tired. You can't call forth those forces again, or it's just you're gonna pass out. So by doing this system, you literally are supporting that descriptor, that description. Some DMs, you can tell they're not quite sure like what the setting is, what the system's representing, and they'll be like, well, you just can't cast that spell again today. And I kind of get it because they're going off of the standard D&D of the spell memorization thing, and so literally they don't have a slot for it anymore. But I think it's more a narrative to just like, why is there not a slot for it? Like, just is there some unspoken law? To me, it's a physical thing. because that marries to the Savage Kingdom's system of stamina. You have so much stamina. So when you're wielding magic, when you're manifesting spells, there's a lot of drain on your body, and that's how you get tired and stuff. Probably quicker than non-magicians, non-spellcasters. Yeah. So anyway, all these house rules are on another video. I just wanted to go over a few others that I might be adding that aren't on the original D&D house rule video from a couple of years ago. I should probably put the link down in the thingy below if I can figure out how to do that. I can just copy and paste, I suppose. Some new ones that I've come up with. Oh yes. So in Savage Kingdoms, the standard rules, true SK, when you get to half your health, or in D&D hit points, same thing really. You are staggered, what's called staggered, and staggered means you're -2 to all your die rolls, your defense, and your mobility. So how do you do that in D&D? Well, you can A, not do it, or B, like I want to do, actually do it, because I think it's silly that a character may have 80 hit points, which already is kind of ridiculous, and then they're completely fine until they get to 0. And yes, there are arguments about, well, the 80 represents all these little nicks and cuts, and the one blow that puts you to 0 is really the real blow, and that's great. But I think it's a little deeper than that, hopefully. So when you go to half, and this also resonates with 4th edition, which I didn't like at all really that much. I think a lot of people agree. But there were certain design choices, and then they were actually pretty cool. To me, one of them was being bloodied. So whenever a character, a monster, an animal, whatever, a being was down to half hit points, it was bloodied. And that was a descriptor to everyone. You could visibly see wounds. You could visibly see that the person or the creature is now suffering a little bit. And it also triggered certain abilities, if I recall. So this kind of plays into that and also honors the Savage Kingdom setting at the same time. I think it's really good to let your character, you let your players know that creatures stagger, like literally the creatures stagger. There's so many wounds at this point, and there should be a drawback to that. So my D&D house rule for that is if you're staggered, it is one level of exhaustion. You see a pattern here. I really like the exhaustion rules, and D&D you can do lots with them, and since there are 6 levels, it's really cool. The level 6 I think is death, but you still have 5 levels of things that can happen to make the character feel tired and weary a little bit. I think that's really cool instead of just all or nothing, which D&D sadly is kind of known for sometimes. So that was a new possible rule. I'm looking at adding intelligence, doing a little bit more in the game, because I know that's intelligence is probably kind of the weakest attribute or ability score. And so I'm looking at, for every bonus point, every plus, yeah, is that what it's called? Yeah. Gives you something. For example, +1 intelligence would give you a bonus language that you get to start with. +2, I think you get to choose a different skill. I'm still kind of working with it. I may not even use it, but I'm looking at it. I don't know. Or maybe it will be half the bonus gives you something like that. So I'm looking at that as well. I might do another video later on with some other ideas that I have. Yeah, pretty much all the other things are in the other video. I don't want to repeat here because that's just kind of redundant. But check it out. It's just I don't want to repeat it, but just in quick, just to list a few of them all. What happens with a natural 1? You only critical fail if it's you get a natural 1 rolling at disadvantage, or if your final result is a 0 or less. Because some people might be -1 or -2 at something that they're trying. Critical successes can also work in skills if you want as well, in addition to attacks. With attacks, they do, I think I'm going to do where instead of double damage dice, you get maximum damage on the one die and then you roll the other one. So, for example, say you crit with a battle axe that you were wielding two-handed. That's D10 damage, I think. So you would deal. So if you critically succeeded, you would critical hit. You would deal 10 points of damage plus the D10 instead of rolling the 2D10. So you're guaranteed, therefore, to score at least 1 point of damage above like the maximum of a non-critical success. And it's pretty easy math, and it'll make combats a little more deadly as they should be. Another kind of thing that harkens back to first edition D&D that I would be doing would be after 10th level, you only earn 1 hit point per level, or your Constitution bonus, whichever is higher. So anyway, I don't want to list them all. I just want to kind of remind folks of some of the things really quick. You can check out the old videos. So thanks for listening, guys. Hopefully we'll see if this converts, and I'll keep working on the conversion, and talk to you guys soon.